Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who are visible to me on the screen, I just want a small gesture of confirmation that you're able to hear me, that the microphone and the system's working okay. Thumbs up if you can hear me all right. Thank you so much. I want to begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to those of you who have hopped on this Zoom call today. First, my best wishes for a wonderful Christmas, a joyous holiday season, and a spectacular new year. I hope your new year will be one where your deepest aspirations for yourself will come to fulfillment. So I want to wish you the very best, from the very bottom of my heart. So thank you. Also an expression of sincere gratitude that you have decided to join today's call. I know the temptations are many. Firstly, it's the holiday season, and I'm sure there is no dearth of other distractions or meaningful activities, relationships, spending time with people that was there. And it means a lot to me that you made the time to join us in this call today. I also want to remind us it's also a Browns game going on. So there are so many other alternative places that you could have been at. So I express my sincere appreciation to all of you who have joined me today. So the topic today is the inward voyage of discovery, the inward voyage of discovery. Now, why do we talk about an inward voyage of discovery? Now, if you look at several of the different spiritual traditions, many of them talk about the central challenge of spirituality as one of going within, of recognizing that just as there's an outside universe out there, a solar system with all the planets and stars, within us, we contain the fullness and the grandness of the universe right within us. It is about awakening to that beauty. And if you look at many wisdom traditions, there are many parables, all of which run like this. And I'll just give you the one from Hinduism, and I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of all the gods and goddesses who were having a meeting, okay? And they were trying to decide, there's this precious dimension to human beings which makes them truly divine. But we must hide this somewhere so that human beings don't find it readily. After all, being divine, there must be an element of challenge. So where should we hide this special component which upon discovery, the human being becomes totally divine and sacred? So they made suggestions. Somebody said, put it on top of the moon. One of the other gods or goddesses said, no, that makes it too easy. NASA has already been building spaceships that will be found. Somebody said, place it at the bottom of the ocean. And one of the gods and goddesses counteracted. That would be too easy too. They're building submarines. They'll find it there. Eventually, one of the people at the meeting said, place it where no one is likely to find it. Place it inside human beings themselves, because that's where nobody ever looks. So there are many parables in various wisdom traditions and cultural traditions that emphasize the recurring theme that we as human beings have a tendency to look everywhere, but we will not look within. And the greatest treasure is right inside us. And we walk around everywhere around the world, and yet we don't find it anywhere. Okay, I just got a text saying that there's some strange distortion or in the microphone. Is anybody else hearing that? Like, is there?
Sounds good, Param.
Yeah, okay.
There's mild popping, like a little of a popping noise.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'm speaking too emphatically. Maybe I need to modulate my tone to a level of gentleness that reaches the very depths of your heart. Okay, so I'll try that. So if the popping,
sound good now.
Okay, that's good. If it ever comes back, just let me know. I think it's those little bubbles of anxiety popping within me that you're hearing, Taking on a topic like the inward voyage of discovery for a person like me is a big challenge, because I'm somebody who has hardly taken the baby steps in that inward voyage of discovery. So speaking about this topic is well beyond my pay grade. So I think the popping noise is the feelings of consternation that are emerging within me. So thank you all for being here. So there is this idea that the greatest treasure is hidden within us. How do we find it? So let's talk about a few ways in which this has been captured. Often on these webinar series, I mention the idea of the circumference and the center. It is the idea that our everyday life is like the circumference. You know, the wheel of a car, you're driving down 71 or 90 or whichever is your favorite freeway. You're driving at 70 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, and it's the hectic activity. We are lost in this feverish activity, running in 100 different directions. And it does feel like we are living on the very circumference of the wheel of life, spinning and spinning. And that is our experience of everyday life. But as the great mystics remind us, how do we find the center? No circle can exist without a center. So the central conundrum of spiritual growth is finding that center within us. If there is the circumference, there must be the center. How do I find the center? Another equally appealing metaphor is that of the ocean, that at the surface of the ocean, there are waves lashing about. There's a tremendous amount of turbulence and disturbance. And yet at the bottom of the ocean, there's a never-ending stillness and silence. How do we, when most of our life appears to be spent in the periphery or in the circumference or in the surface of the ocean, find that stillness within? And therefore, the central challenge is how to be in the world, but not of the world. How to be in the world, but not of the world. You know, how do we be in the world? Now you're in the world, there are many different trances we can fall into. What are some of those trances? I'll just give you a few of those. First, there's the trance of economitis. In the trance of economitis, we become just homo economicus. You know, we start living as economic machines, calculating our profit and loss, our cost benefit analysis, and our returns on investment. But that alone would be an impoverished way to live life. Whereas, you know, we are not just economicus, we are also aestheticus. There is an aesthetic beauty to life, and we forget that. There is the trance of robotic efficiency, where we make our to-do list and we get lost in that list. And by the time you strike out the 20th job on the list, you are again beginning to construct your list for the next day. So we live life as a series of to-do lists, perhaps very efficiently, but with a great sense of loss of the more enticing fragrances and flavors that life has to offer. You know, I was cooking yesterday and I just remembered a beautiful metaphor. Life should be a festival of spices, you know, and that is how, you know, we giving ourselves the ability and the sense of awakened consciousness to take in all those aromas. The trance of the ladder of success. You know, many of you have heard the story of the Mexican fisherman and the American tourist. If you haven't heard it, I will spare you some time. Google the story, Irony of the Rat Race. It's a beautiful story, Irony of the Rat Race. It's got so much of value in it. I will not tell it. You can just read it up. But the irony of the rat race reminds us of the ladder of success. There is the idea that I have to do this, and then I have to do this, and then I have to do this, where we start approaching life as a series of rungs on a ladder, and we keep climbing one ladder and the next because our desires are constantly multiplying. But one of the things that we seldom awaken to is that at any point, the distance between where we are and our desires seems the same. When I was 21, I had desires, and I had the illusion that if I reached those desires, then I would reach a space of contentment. Little did I know that as the years go by, I move closer to my desires, but these desires themselves seem to be disappearing into the vastness of an eternal universe. So at any point in time, I'm chasing this receding universe without any sense of getting closer to it. So it's the ladder of success. You keep climbing, and when you're 58 years old, you recognize that ladder was perhaps leaning against the wrong wall. The trance of doing and having, where we throw ourselves into possessing things, acquiring things, into doing and accomplishing so much that we have lost, you know, the soothing fragrance of just being. and that again is a lesson that comes out beautifully in the irony of the rat race. What else do we have here? The trance of the bottomless begging bowl, where we are asking, the universe for this and that. And even when the universe fulfills it, it's just amazing. Anything that we have achieved loses its value. Isn't that just amazing? It's so easy then to understand the anatomy of human greed. If anything that you achieve, once you achieve, has lost its value, and we have fallen into the trance of endless possession, no wonder we are always left in a chronic sense of dissatisfaction. The trance of the unanswerable question. Like each of us has a source of insecurity or inferiority from our childhood that we are trying to compensate, and that leaves us with an unanswerable question. Mine was, Param, are you smart enough? Why? Because people, when you were young, thought you were stupid. Param, am I smart enough? And then I fall into the trance of this unanswerable question, trying to prove myself and to others in 1,000 ways I'm smart enough. For somebody else, it might be, am I good enough? Somebody called you a bad child, and it stuck with you. And then your entire life became a life of atonement, of being good, so that you would earn back that sense of appreciation, and you again begin to see yourself as worthy of the love. The trance of the quest to be extraordinary. We are all trying to be extraordinary. And in that quest, we fall into a trance, and years of our life can disappear in the pursuit of the quest. The trance of knowledge, where you start becoming knowledgeable, and as a result of that, you often get lost in theories and words. I'm getting a recommendation to unplug my headphone and plug it back on, which obviously means that you're continuing to have sounds that are interfering with your capacity to hear. Is that right? Raise your hand if you're still getting the distortions. Okay, so this in fact is an important moment of spiritual awakening. You try to solve a problem, today's solution becomes tomorrow's problem. So I was concerned that I was not clear enough when I was using the AirPods. So I said, I will get one notch better on the acoustic ladder, and I'll use my plugged in microphones because they're so much better. And then I got a new level of distortion. So today's solutions are tomorrow's problems. How is it now? Is that any better? Yeah. Okay.
You just sound a little muffled.
Yeah, this is a metaphor for life.
Right.
You get one thing and you lose another. You leave, so I had better clarity, but you had the popping sound. And I tried to find a solution, and now I have less clarity, but no popping sound. Is this true of our relationships? Is this true of life itself? So let's use this moment for the deeper awakening. If at any point I become inaudible, just let me know. Please turn on your microphone and awaken me to what is going on. So is it at least decent quality now? Yeah. Okay.
Sounds great, Ram.
Okay. We can always start polling people on, do you prefer A or B? And then we can start debating that. So there are many different trances, and I also want to speak about a book that I found very beautiful and inspiring. Usually when I wake up in the morning, I go to that bookshelf at the back and I pick up one at random and see what it does for me. Today's book was The Glory of Freedom, Sufis, the People of the Path by Osho. So I said, let's see what it is that is in this book that I could share with my friends and with my little community that we assemble at 2 o'clock. So Glory of Freedom is the name of the book. And here, Osho presents the idea from Sufism of the 7 valleys that we have to cross. The idea of the 7 valleys is that as we begin our spiritual journey, we come upon a valley and we have to climb the mountain. If you climb the mountain, you're liberated. There is an explosion of joyous celebration at the end of the valley. But then you come upon a new valley once you have climbed that mountain. And there are 7 such valleys. And when you reach the 7th valley, it's the ultimate pinnacle of spiritual liberation. What are these 7 valleys as seen through the lens of the Sufis? So we'll take a moment to celebrate the life and work of Al-Ghazali, who was a Sufi mystic that Osho writes about in the book, The Glory of Freedom. So the danger, though, is that these valleys are very enticing, you know, and you could become so attached to that valley and to all the, seductions of that valley that you might actually get stuck in it. The challenge is to keep moving, And so the first valley is the valley of knowledge. Well, particularly lethal for someone who's chosen to be a college professor. In the valley of knowledge, you become so hooked on knowledge. You become so hooked on the content of knowledge, on remembering theories, on regurgitating knowledge, just like I'm doing. I read this book in the morning and look at what I'm doing. I'm regurgitating what I've read, right? That means, but if that's all I do, I'm going to be stuck in the valley of knowledge. And it's very enticing because when you can expound on a theory and you use a lot of words, you get a false sense of security that you know. If I can speak for an hour about the art of loving, I'm likely to be deluded into thinking of myself as a loving person without remembering that it's just words and words and words and words. So the first thing to remember is that the word is nothing other than a sound. Love is not the experience of love. It is just the sound love. Now, if I mistake that sound for the experience, I'm going to be caught in the valley of knowledge, you know, and I know many different theories about love. And every time I say love, I think I know the experience. My heart may not know the experience, just my mouth may have the capacity to articulate it. And I have to tell you that in my family, there was an obsession for using long words. So for example, you know, the longest word in the English language, my first effort at getting self-esteem was to be able to enunciate the longest word in the English language flawlessly. That word is flossy-nosy-nihilipilification. What does flossy-nosy-nihilipilification mean? It's the art of describing something as worthless. For example, at the end of this webinar, if you say, I just got no value from it, it was such a useless webinar, then you would be engaging in the flossy-nosy-nihilipilification of this webinar. I decided I'm not going to be a person who drives big cars. Instead, I get my ego trip from driving big words. That's the danger of the valley of knowledge. In the valley of knowledge, you become hooked on the content of knowledge versus the consciousness. In the valley of knowledge, you become so attached to the knowledge itself that you forget the capacity of knowing. The curiosity, the inquisitiveness that makes knowledge beautiful is forgotten, and knowledge is relied upon as a crutch. Well, let's assume I have passed the valley of knowledge. I haven't, but let's just assume in this imaginary world that I have crossed the valley of knowledge. I come upon the valley of repentance. The valley of repentance, says Osho through the lens of the Sufi mystics, is where you suddenly start becoming more aware of yourself and of the effect that you've had on other people, and a great sense of regret and remorse arises. How many of us can think of people that we have hurt for no reason at all? We have caused immense suffering to other people, to perhaps pets. Even our diet is the result, is built on the misery and torture of factory farms. All of a sudden, we begin to start seeing the level of suffering and misery we have inflicted, and then when we become conscious of that, a great sense of regret arises. You feel guilty. You feel unhappy with who you've been. For me, it was been hard seeing, so many years of my life have gone and are still going, just trying to make myself famous. When I was 17 years old, now I'm letting you know this, only for you to know how messed up my psychological foundation has been over these years. When I was 16 or 17, or maybe even 15, I was actually 11th, 12th grade, I sat down to dinner and it hit me, this was Mumbai, that I will never be world famous. And when I hit that feeling, I became so sad. I stopped eating for 3 or 4 days because I decided I will never be world famous. I will never be a household name. Can you just imagine? For 3 or 4 days, you have the 16 or 15-year-old mourning that he'll never be world famous, right? Now, so much of my life has gone in trying to make myself famous. What do you think this webinar series is? Just another pathetic rearguard action to make myself famous? Perhaps. I leave it to you to decide. So there's the valley of repentance where you begin to start having regret. Well, you could get caught in it, but then if you move past it, you grow consciousness. So here is where Osho talks about the distinction between the conscience and the consciousness. The conscience is given to us by society. It gives us external standards of how you're supposed to treat each other and relate to each other. Now, as we know, the conscience is rooted in the external social morality of society. It's based on social consciousness, consensus. Consciousness is much deeper. It is something that grows from within. So the positive part of the valley of repentance is that you move away from conscience, where you keep blaming yourself, to growing your consciousness, where you start feeling grateful for having seen how harmful you could have been to others and to yourself. Rather than focus on what a damaging force you've been in the world, you start feeling grateful for the fact that you have been able to see some truths about yourself. And a new level of inner compassion and generosity can start growing. Then you move to the third valley, the valley of stumbling blocks. The valley of stumbling blocks are where this valley is ridden with 4 kinds of stumbling blocks according to the Sufis. So each one of these stumbling blocks can trip you up. And if you trip, you'll fall flat on your face, like slipping on the ice and falling, and then you have to pick yourself up. What are these 4 stumbling blocks? I will name these 4 stumbling blocks, but don't fall, says Osho, into the common trap of becoming against the stumbling block. For example, one of the stumbling blocks is the world of material objects and material luxuries. You could get so hooked on material objects and material luxuries and the 5-star culture and eating in Michelin certified restaurants and what have you, that you get stuck in materialism. But Osho reminds us that if you reject materialism, that is the same thing as embracing materialism. Now, that's a counterintuitive thought, right? I thought if I renounce money, then I've moved away from money. But no, to Osho, renouncing money and being obsessed with money are 2 sides of the same coin. They both betray a deep attachment to money. So neither be for something or against something. And here Osho says, the second attachment is to people. We start defining a narrow circle of friends and family, and we say, these are my special people, and these are the people I will protect. Let the rest of the world go to hell. I don't give a rat's ass. Well, no, because when you become attached to people, you start possessing your husband, possessing your wife. You start having needs to control your children because you believe they're your children. Unlike Rumi, who reminds us that your children don't belong to you. They have taken passage through you. You are there, like a stewardship to take care of them, but you don't own them. They're not your children, right? So we can become attached to people, but Osho reminds us that being for or against is the same. Like, for example, if you hate your enemies too much, you are still attached to them. Can you see that hatred for your enemies still means you're stuck with your enemies? So attachment can take many forms. It can take the form of being for something, being obsessed with something, or it can take the form of resisting something, because even when you're busy resisting something, you're being controlled by it. If I say, I hate money, it is so dirty, I'm still being controlled by money. So the valley of stumbling blocks, the material world, you might get so intoxicated with materialism that you get stuck there. People, you can get so narrowly attached through the language of possession and control and domination that you get stuck to people and you don't awaken to what lies at the core of all of us as human beings, that sense of unity and oneness, that we are all under the same umbrella of existence. Attachment, the third attachment is to the mind. You know, the chattering monkey, the voice in your head that is continuously talking to you, right? And weaving stories and interpretations that creates lenses on the world. And you could get attached to the mind. And I want to share something about how we get attached to the mind. Even the greatest knowledge that we think that we have earned is itself an illusion. You know, for example, I want to take for the next 2 minutes, and I know I'm running out of time and we need to get through the 7 valleys. How tragic if I leave you in a cliffhanger at the end of the 4th valley, not knowing what the remaining 3 valleys are. So you know what? Better counsel has prevailed upon me, and I've decided not to take the detour. I will do that pantomime and dramatization another time. So let's keep making progress. The valley of the mind, you know, the stumbling block of the mind, where you get attached to all your concepts. We forget that the word is just a sound, and it's a process by which we attach meanings through these sounds. We associate sounds with certain experiences, and a meaning structure is created. Can we see beyond these words? And Osho reminds us how, when you see a beautiful rose, you're not really looking at a flower. Can you see that immediately the word rose has popped into your head? And immediately the word beautiful has popped into your head? Notice how easy for us to place a distance between our experience and our concept. We are living in a world of concepts so far removed from the experience. The moment I say a beautiful rose, I have used words, and the words has created a distance, a barrier between me and the experience. We are so busy, says Osho, we stand before the Himalayas and the Alps, but rather than just being with the majestic beauty of the mountain, I will be pulling out a pocket map and trying to identify where I am and locating myself on a map. We confuse the map for the mountain. Similarly, we confuse the menu for the meal. We forget that the experience of eating the meal and the experience of staring at a menu are totally different. And what is higher education other than enticing you and keeping you stuck, showing you one menu after another? My organizational behavior textbook tells you about leadership and about motivation, and students can get confused looking at the contents and the theories of motivation and the theories of leadership that they're learning something. Yes, they're learning knowledge, but are they gaining the experience of that? And hence, we are very grateful to Professor Laurie Long for her tireless dedication and championship of experiential learning, and her tireless efforts in Baldwin Wallace to not stop at the level of the conceptual and to create 1,001 opportunities where our students can wander into the world of the experience. Experiencing love for a moment is more important than spending 5 days learning all the theories of love. And the fourth, so attachment to the material world, to people, to the mind. And the fourth stumbling block is the ego, where we start getting so intoxicated with our own ego. I cannot tell you how good I'm feeling that I'm not at a loss for words today. I cannot tell you how good I'm feeling that I'm so articulate. Notice how easy it is. Here I am talking to you about the ego, but just as I'm talking about the ego, you know, it's almost like I'm pumping my ego with more hot air, reveling in how effortlessly I'm speaking, reveling in how I'm introducing you to the marvels of ego transcendence. But I'm doing so while relishing in my ego. But then Osho reminds us, don't take the ego to be your enemy, because then you fall into the trap of conquering your ego and becoming the most humble person in the congregation, which is yet another manifestation of your ego. So he says, don't take the ego as an enemy, take it as a challenge. When you take it as a challenge, you can become playful about the game of ego transcendence without becoming overly serious. And the best way to transcend the ego is to allow it to play itself out, to watch it and to become aware of it, to notice how much you gloat every time you tell somebody, I told you so, I've been telling you this for the last month, and now you understand. Notice that feeling of being right, of noticing the other person is wrong, of dominating a discussion, of impressing people as I'm hopelessly trying to do
on this occasion, or of complaining about people. So the ego can take two forms, either polishing and looking good, or complaining about others, how others suck and they are terrible. So these are two manifestations of the ego. But if you take the ego as a challenge, it becomes like scoring a basket. Try, can you get the 3-pointer? You keep trying, and it's just a game. Can you transcend the ego? Well, I guess not this time, because I'm really obviously taking such ego gratification in giving this talk. Perhaps the next time, maintaining the constant sense of awareness, because it's just the acceptance of your ego, but your awareness of it, maintaining that sense of alertness that helps you overcome it. The fourth valley, oh my goodness, it's 2:30. I'm going to name the remaining valleys and I'll end the webinar, because I want to be at least somewhat within like 5-minute radius of my ending time, so I don't have a reputation for I don't know, I guess what valley that would be, the valley of interminable discourses. Yeah, the valley of tribulations. The valley of tribulations is the fourth valley. This is where Osho says you start going into the valley of your own unconscious. Notice how the first 3 valleys deal with the conscious mind. The valley of knowledge, the valley of repentance, and the valley of stumbling blocks. This is all within the domain of the conscious. But there is this unconscious mind where you have desires and motives that would be scary to you, and it becomes so frightening. And it's what in Christianity has been called the dark night of the soul. And when you come into the valley of tribulations, you start being enveloped by a great sense of doubt, not just skepticism. Skepticism is intellectual. Skepticism is all this smoke that Param is blowing. Is this really making any sense? That's skepticism. But doubt is, do I really know what is right? And do I really know what is wrong? So when you live through that, all the certainties disappear. And this is where it's almost like the current world, where unless we start dancing with ambiguity as our salsa partner or our ballroom dance partner, ambiguity and confusion and chaos, you're willing to embrace them and ask them to dance with you. If you're looking for certainty, we are likely to be in much pain and much grief, because the certainties are not there. And culturally, we have been programmed to celebrate conviction. See how we always like leaders who speak with a lot of conviction? We don't trust people in leadership positions if they have doubt. But can you see how it is doubt that opens the way to new learning? If you're somebody who's really open to new learning, you can never be consistent, because always new discoveries will come up and you will have to modify your convictions and cognitive structures. If you embrace doubt, you can never be celebrating conviction. You have to make friends with doubt. The fifth valley is the thundering valley, where your ego begins to melt, just like you will see the snow outside melting today, when the temperature reaches 39, your ego will start melting. And that's the thundering valley. You start disappearing. Now, when your ego starts melting, it's very scary, because most of us are known to survive by clinging to the ego. I is the word that we most often use in the English language. We carve out a separate identity for ourselves. This is me, this is mine. Mine and me seems to be the boat through which we go through life's tempestuous waters. And I'm asking you to dissolve that boat. Now, I'm not asking you to do that, because I've not dissolved my boat, but the great masters have asked us to call upon us to dissolve that boat and to become one with the ocean. It is where the wave dies. You die as a wave and you become part of the ocean. When you become part of the ocean, you're so much more powerful. You're so much more universal. But what often happens is that we start out of fear, clinging to our ego. As we start disappearing, and as a greater sense of ego transcendence starts permeating us, we say, who will exist? Who will remember me? Param is dying. What about his reputation for his Sunday webinars? And I freak out and I'll start clinging more to the self. No, the secret at that point is what Buddhists called anatta, no self, or the Sufis called fana. It's death. But it's not necessarily the physical death, it's the metaphorical death of your ego as a separate entity. If you can become comfortable at this time, becoming ordinary, not necessarily to be known in the Northeast Ohio area as a man who does spectacular Sunday webinars, but just as Param, just ordinary. If you can be at peace with your ordinariness and this obsession to be extraordinary and special at the cost of everybody else, if that can start melting gradually, you can embrace the ordinariness in you and find comfort in that commonality that we're all just ordinary human beings, in this carnival, meeting each other and helping each other. And then you move past the thundering valley. The sixth valley is the abysmal valley, where you have metaphorically died. You are no more, and you are starting to blossom into a deep sense of gratitude, where the past exists no more. Only the future exists, and you are feeling grateful. And the seventh valley is the most beautiful valley. We will only name the valley because it is so musical. It would be a disservice to speak about the valley in words. It's called the Valley of Hymns. In the Valley of Hymns, your work is done. There is nothing more to be done. Life is just laughter. It is a song. It is a celebration. And you burst forth into an egoless sense of enjoyment of the universal, and you begin to awaken to that deep sense of oneness that connects us all. It's the Valley of Hymns. So on that note, folks, it's 2:36. I apologize for going a little beyond time. The formal part of the webinar is indeed over. So at this point, if you want to log off, or at any point you could log off, but certainly at this point, you're welcome to log off. We are not trying to keep you here longer, but we have just established an informal convention of lingering on for a few minutes. If people want to share, ask a question, a clarification, share a story or a comment, it's just a space of community. And at some point when there is silence and there's nothing more that needs to be said, we will end the informal part of the session. So this is just milling around and hanging out if you feel like it. Firstly, so we have formally ended the part of that webinar. Thank you so much. My deep and sincere expression of gratitude to today. I think when we talk about the Great Inward Journey, I was reading this book. I have quoted it often on this webinar. I would recommend this. It's the smallest of Osho's books, and it is written so beautifully, meditation for busy people, stress beating strategies for people with no time to meditate. And it's just a few pages. It's the kind of meditation techniques. It comes with an app now where there are like 30 meditation techniques, very simple ones that you can practice while you're washing your car, you're vacuuming your floor at any time. So it's not special time you have to carve out for yourself. You weave it into the ceaseless flow of everyday living and into the fabric of life. And as you're walking your dog, you can be engaging in one of those techniques. So I would recommend that book to you. And speaking words of wisdom, let it be. Okay, so at this point, I will stop the recording because there are, because I want to create a safe space where people feel free to raise their concerns, doubts, and questions without necessarily feeling that this is going to go out into cyberspace. So let's see here. Okay, stop recording.